So we are preparing the live stream on YouTube now. It's connecting. El cargador del ordenador está cargando. There you go.
So, you're ready. Okay, so here we are. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you Formafantasma, thank you Andrea, and thank you Simone for being with us tonight. It is a pleasure. Welcome to the Institute for Postnatural Studies.
Thank you for having us.
So this will be one of our last conversations of the year. As you know, the Institute for Postnatural Studies is a platform or a center for artistic experimentation from which we explore and problematize the idea or the notion of post-nature as a framework for contemporary creation. This has been our first year, and it has led us to very beautiful practices and people like yours. We are super thankful with all the people that is joining us in many ways. We wanted to say hello to all the people from the seminars also, and to all the people that has somehow been part of our recent project. We wanted to present first Formafantasma. For those of you who don't know them, they are designers from Italy, and why we are interested in their practice is because they dissect the ecological and political responsibilities of the discipline of design, something that cannot only be considered design anymore, but something much more complex. And as everyone will see during the talk, for those of you that don't know their work, they have a very holistic approach that reaches back into the history of particular materials used by humans, but also towards the patterns and supply chains that have developed to support and expand their uses. No? So they also are focusing on the future of material survival in relation to human consumption, and lots of different bridges between crafts, industry, object making, the user, and these forging links between a research-based practice and a wider design industry. So for us, it's super important to have this conversation because it opens also our understanding of a new concept of nature towards design and creative practice. So just very briefly, their work has been presented and published internationally in basically all the big important museums around the world, such as the MoMA, the London Victoria and Albert Museum, Metropolitan Museum, Chicago Art Institute, and super long list of places where they have exhibited their work, and also of awards. And we just wanted to congratulate you of your recently achieved mention as the Design Studio of the Year by the SIM a couple of weeks ago. Congratulations on that. Nice way to finish the year. Such a strange year, but a beautiful one for you too. So what we propose for today, and I'm gonna share screen now. Let me see if this works. Oh.
No, dale, share.
No, está en borrado. Ok. So, no sé qué tengo que hacer. Sorry. Later.
But it was,
¿Qué hago?
dale a share screen again.
Share screen. Okay, so here.
Keynote.
So now you can see our screen, right?
Yes.
So what we propose for today is a conversation, a journey, a connection, or even a speculative approach to your practice, in which we would like to blur somehow this binary categorization of the world, which separates the natural from the artificial, the human from the non-human, and along, etc. But also the categories and disciplines from which we explore, curate, design, and create. So we want all the people that are joining us in the YouTube to join us in this journey through your projects, through your designs and exhibitions, but also through their territories, their landscapes, their materialities, their stories, the stories that are behind and sometimes are not told, and to make some relations to some things that we are investigating from the Institute for Postnatural Studies. So before we start, thank you again. We are super happy to have you and hope you enjoy the journey. It is funny because Simone and Andrea haven't seen these images, so
no,
for
indeed,
us,
we are singing now. Very interesting. Very
so they will be taken to the journey too. I hope you enjoy it. Hope you enjoy your own. So one of the main purposes of the Institute is to open up a new conception and notion of the postnatural, which, as I was saying before, tries to dismantle the notion of culture against nature somehow, or that invites to rethink how culture, its paintings, its literatures, its objects, in many different formats, has created a somehow romanticized notion of the natural. We want to change this perspective and invite to understand nature as a more complex cultural, economical, socio-political construct. And we think this is super aligned with your last project, with Cambio. This ongoing investigation into somehow the governance of the timber industry, which was commissioned by the Serpentine Galleries, and that helps somehow to give depth to our relation, not only to forests, their woods and trees, but to nature and landscape as a very complex constellation. So we would like to start from here, from one of your last big investigations, from this change of perspective, and maybe from the word itself, from the word Cambio. So before we get and deepen into the exhibition, we would like to ask, why is the exhibition called Cambio? In what sense do you use this term?
Yes. So we decided to use the term cambio, that is actually an Italian word, because we didn't want to use the scientific term that it refers to, which is cambium in Latin, or cambia layer in English, which is a few cellular thick layer that sits between the bark of a tree and its inside. And to tell a very simplified story, which is probably the only one we can say, because of course we are not scientists, the cambia layer helps the communication and the understanding of the tree, or what is happening to the outside of the tree and its inside. And it was particularly important, the cambia layer, which is present not only in trees but also in plants, for plants to mutate from plants to trees, and to develop a scaffolding,
yeah, exactly.
A protection, a shield, to grow through climate changes that is actually wood. So we decided to use this word because it referenced the ability of plants to go through changes and to transform even into trees. Also because it was a layer particularly important, to help trees coping with climate changes. So there is a clear reference to that. But also because when a tree is cut for the extractions of wood, the first things that happen is that roots are cut, branches are removed, the bark is removed. And with the removing of the bark, also the cambia layer is stripped away.
So it's a specific moment in which a tree that is actually living beings becomes a product. So we thought it was a very evocative word, both for the sense of change, of cambiamento, of cambio, but also, of course, because it refers to a specific part of the body of a tree. That actually is the body they've investigated with Cambio, the exhibition.
So just for English speakers that might be following, because in Italian, cambio means change.
Yeah.
And of course, this layer is what allows change into plants. So this is why we decided to use this word.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful. It works itself as a very beautiful tool. No, like the word opens up so many meanings, referring to the specifics of the wood itself, and also to this differentiation between wood and timber. That it's part one of the main parts of the investigation. What are the differences between wood and timber? So can you explain them super easily?
I mean, you know, the two terms sometimes are used as one synonymous of the other. So it's not, there's not like a, you know, a necessarily one clear answer to this question. But of course, when you talk about wood, you often talk about the materiality, and it is also the materiality of the tree. When you talk about timber, you talk about a product. So again, I would say, I mean, this is quite of a simplification because again, these are words that, you know, sometimes they also use as synonymous. But I would say that this is the main difference. When you talk about timber, you really talk about the product, the industrial use of it. And wood is a materiality. It's basically the flesh of the tree.
And I love to hear this first definition of the term that you were saying. I didn't know that, and it's very beautiful. And this protection towards the climate change. And it seems that the future of design can, of course, as you're showing us, and must attempt to translate this emerging environmental awareness into a renewed understanding of the philosophies and politics of our landscapes, or the trees, for example, that will encourage informed collaborative responses such as yours. And I think with Cambio, you are shifting the forest somehow, or the trees, from the background to become the protagonist. You're really taking them to the foreground. But I wanted to know, we wanted to know, how has Cambio changed? I love how the word works itself. How has Cambio changed your perspective towards wood and timber and their uses themselves? How has the exhibition changed your own practice?
Well, I would start with an anecdote, and maybe we can also continue in how we are also approaching this within our practice. One of the first things we did when we started the exhibition, to work on the exhibition, is to visit the Val di Fiemme. You had beautiful images before. It's something that we shot last year when we visited the Valle in Italy, in the north of Italy. In one night only, in 2018, 14 million of trees have been fall because of a huge storm. What's called Storm Vaya, and of course the storm was because of climate change. And it was the first time we were faced with a disaster caused by human, and there are a lot of reasons because it's caused by human, and we can also tell you later. And it's the first time that I saw a forest not anymore as a, you know, as a multiple collection of trees, but as a actually dead bodies. And for us, I think for me was one of the most emotional things ever. That changed completely the relation I had with trees. We felt the pain of actually a living being dying.
Yes, it was extremely, honestly, I think it was the first time that, yeah, I almost had a bodily reaction to it.
But not a positive one. It was almost like a...
Yeah, it was horrible.
So probably that was the first time we really changed immediately the perception of it. Then, of course, the work was all about understanding the terms, trees, lumber, as you were mentioning, wood. You know, it was all of this research of understanding what it actually means working with this entity.
But to go even more specific towards your question, I can't really say that our approach to wood has necessarily changed. You know, I wish we could say that. You know, I'm, you know, our life is radically different now. It's not that. It's not that because, well, you know, I can't even think. I wish my life could be so radically affected by our own practice. but it's simply not. It's simply not, and it's not due to cynicism or to a separate or to a strict separation between our practice and our way of living, but it's because the changes that some of the things we investigated would imply, we don't even understand them fully. What I mean to say is that when you look deeply into a problem, and here the problem, to name it, is the complexity of dealing with a climate disaster and being designers affecting the world and contributing to the productions of things, and being used to a way of living of consuming, because sadly there's also that part. It's not something that can be held by a generation even, or by a practice only. So there is not that immediate, we are not so immediately affected. I think it is a more, there is a stream of knowledge, informations, even emotions that boils beneath the surface of our own life and our own practice. And we hope it will come to the surface with more power and strength with our future works, and within also the education programs that we are involved with. But it goes beyond us. It is, I guess, it is affecting us in the sense that we learn to become more sophisticated in the way we work, in understanding the limitations and the possibilities of what we do. So I would say that it's affecting us in that level.
Yeah.
You know, we become more and more aware of what we can and what we can't do, of how beautiful this discipline is and how dull it is also. So it is at this level that the work is affecting us.
Yeah. Thank you for these kind of very sincere answers, no? Because this thing you said about, which I think is very important, like getting to know the forest as a body, and then taking care of the body, or taking care of the objects that you're putting in the exhibition space, and taking care of them really. And because this shifting notion, of course, is something very important, but also dealing with the problem, or staying with the trouble, or this kind of logics of being there, being in the problem, not trying to solve the problem because the problem is so huge that that will become another that will require other economies and other logics that are very complex and sometimes even paralyzing. But this notion of being inside a very big problem and trying to deal with it, I think it's a very beautiful and sincere way to address design
also
today.
Because there is this narrative that design can do everything, you know, but
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it can do a lot if it's in a much more connected and multidisciplinary world. Otherwise, you know, we are we are speaking between each other. That's it.
Totally, and I love that approach. I really think it's very important. But we also understand the project has these quite political touch or political scope, or at least it has become also a tool to unveil all the politics embedded in forests or in natural resources. So because forests and all these resources, of course, the subjective interpretations, all the economies have led to very abusive practices, very anthropocentric displays of power, and so on. But you have these very beautiful kind of documents in the investigation that for us are very, very important. Can you tell us more about these kind of maps drawn by hand that we can find in the or other stories that even identify or denounce this kind of dynamics?
Yes. So when we were working on the exhibition, of course, you also need to decide what will become part of the show and what not, you know, and you try to design a trajectory which is influenced by the dimension of the space, by how you know, wide a corridor is, but also, of course, because you think that certain things should be addressed. Yeah. And the exhibition, there is a trajectory from the beginning till the end of the show, which moves in I would say in scale, in time, and in space. In scale, in the sense that we start very up close at the beginning of the exhibition with observing things very, on a macroscopical level, really understanding information within wood, and then it moves, observing things from, I would say from a more bird eye perspective, both spatially, so in space and in time. And at one point, we of course understood it was important to include, if not the voice, the presence or the struggles of communities which are not European. Of course, when you talk about forest, it's impossible not to deal with tropical forests and even, of course, with the Amazonian forest, because in temperate areas such as in Europe or boreal forests, there is a certain amount of biodiversity. But when you talk about forests around the tropics and the Amazon, then there you talk about a biome which is so complex, which needs to be addressed in itself. And the way we decided to address this part of the globe, I would say, and this reality, is with the support of an NGO called Gaia Amazonas that is based in Colombia. In our studio, there is a person working with us that is Colombian, and of course, he contributed in creating the link with his community and with his NGO, actually. And their work is helping indigenous communities in Colombia to map their territories, because since quite a while by now in all the Southern America, because of several reasons, by now a lot of countries in their constitutions recognize the rights of the indigenous communities there. But there is a problem that, of course, the geopolitics that we know and the way of documenting power through mapping is something that's, of course, extremely Western. And so this NGO, Gaia Amazonas, help indigenous communities to use a language that they consider extremely ignorant and extremely rudimental to map the territories. And we decided to include some of the mapping done by these communities because we love them, because even if what you see already for them, it's a very rudimental representation, because it is an attempt to mediate, with our own way of intending the territory. But still, within these maps, you see that whenever there is the attempt of describing a territory, it's not made of just a
information from the top.
But it implements communities, different kind of plants, different kinds of animals, a much more complex reality. And some of these maps were really beautiful because, for instance, so we are talking about communities in Colombia. When they are asked to describe their territory, describe where their territories end, what is beautiful is that they intend their territories as a biome, not in terms of geopolitical forces that we usually know. So when a community in Colombia designed their territory, of course, they designed the river extending till Brazil. And here is what we were interested in doing. And in the exhibition, we overlapped these drone maps on top of Radam Brazil documentations of the Amazon, which is a project initiated by the Brazilian government of mapping the Amazon for exploitative purposes in the 70s. Then the Radam became an incredibly important tool because, of course, nowadays we have a comparative tool to say, to document how the deforestation is progressing from the 70s, because finally we have a mapping of it. But it was extremely interesting to overlap these two realities because you could see a completely different way of intending the understanding of a biome, and to show this tension between the Aboriginal indigenous knowledge, which have a much more sophisticated way of understanding, you know, a geographical area, I would say, and the geopolitical one we know, which is extremely rudimental in that respect.
Definitely, we when we were navigating through the documents and we saw these, we find them very powerful, very designed devices, and just we stayed some time looking at the plants, how the plants are drawn. They're so beautiful. But for us, it was also important with this set and all this idea of these cosmologies and these ways of representing the reality that are very direct related to the place. We also like how you incorporate technology, and how you also have this multi-perspective, multimedia approach to research. And can you tell us what is the role of technology also in this way of re-understanding natural resources, or what role does it play in the exhibition itself, which is a lot?
Well, I think definitely it plays a role in the sense that, for instance, we use a very specific technology, which is the LiDAR, which is a way of scanning. So first I need to explain what LiDAR is. LiDAR is a technology that uses laser way of describing whatever objects, I would say, from buildings to forests to whatever, using a system of you know, sort of laser from you know, an aerial view that points down, and laser from within the object you're trying to describe, so within an architecture or within a forest. And of course, where these two sort of lasers meet, then you create dots and points. And these are, for instance, the images that we have in front of us right now. You can see how the forest is described through these tiny little dots. They create this ghostly appearance. So the what is interesting, I think, visually about the LiDAR is that, again, it's an extremely ignorant way of describing things. If you think about it, it can be useful for different things, but in terms of understanding, of course, there's no understanding beyond surface and mass, which is what is interesting for exploitations of forests. You know, you need just a surface. Not that the LiDAR is only used for that, but from a business perspective, that's what it's used for. And what we thought was interesting, because basically what you have is a scanning of a forest, which you have as a 3D model, then the digital 3D model in your computer, which can be a powerful tool even to assess over time, for instance, the health of a forest, what is happening to a forest. But we were interested in the fact that the tool is used essentially to do not clear cutting of forests, but to decide, for instance, what to extract specifically in a forest. And we used it as a animation tool. And for animation, we mean it really like in the literal sense that we all intend, like as a tool to create an animation, but also as a tool for an animistic tool. Yeah. You know, because then we could use this as a way of animating literally a forest and giving a voice to it, or attempting to give a voice to it, which is of course a very anthropocentric approach, you know, to say like, okay, let's humanize a forest and let's have the forest speaking. It's almost a Disney movie, you know.
Even if we use certain tricks in a way that they, like for instance, like some part of the movie is called Quercus, is not the human view, but it's the view almost from the bottom up, from the roots. So we, in a way, we try also to kind of move the point of view from the human one to, you know, another one.
For us, this was a very interesting exercise, because then you need to ask yourself these questions.
Yeah,
what is the point of view?
Yeah, which is the voice that this tree should have? Is
it male? Is it female? Is multi-voices? And we had some beautiful conversation with Teresa Castro. She's a scholar in Paris, and she's really looking into these subjects of representation. And she developed very interesting and brilliant observations of, for instance, how movies helped humans to understand plant sentience, so the plants are, you know, alive through time lapse technology, of course. And we had a conversation with her, and she helped us in, posing us ourselves these questions, for instance, about gender. When you animate, a forest, you really have, because sorry, I probably, for people that didn't see the movie Quercus, which was featured in the exhibition, the movie is literally animating through LiDAR this forest, and the forest is then literally speaking back to humans, and it's almost, I would say, an existential monologue written by philosopher Emanuele Coccia. But of course, we had this question, of course, about, for instance, the gendering creatures that are not humans and not even mammal. And so, for instance, the decision we took was to work with an actress, a woman actress, and we pitched her voice down to a more lower tones. We were really thinking to make an ambiguous voice, but everybody tells us they think it's a man. So something went wrong down there. And in some moments in the movies, the voice also splits, and it becomes multiple voices.
Oh, this is super beautiful, and it's super connected to a research we're doing from the Institute about these ghostly ecologies, and how there are some terms like ghost that are so still anthropocentric. Like we just see the image of the ghost is directly related to a ghost of a human, but there are lots of dead bodies of natural entities that are surrounding us, and this idea of giving voice to these ghosts is super beautiful. And I love this idea of using technology in order to do that. Like, I think that works super well. We wanted to make like a super last question about this project. We could spend like a year talking about Cambio, but we want to keep moving. But there is something that we love about the project, and it's how you displace some wood samples from the collection of the Kew Gardens and the storage spaces of the Victoria and Albert Museum, like these spaces dedicated to the taxonomies and organization of natural resources. We think that this movement is a piece of a strategic piece of design itself, like this displacement of objects from one institution to the exhibition space. Can you tell us more about this institutional cambio, this institutional exchange? How does this movement operate itself, and how easy or difficult was it to get these specific pieces?
I have to say it was quite okay. It was not so difficult.
Now you say so, but
well, maybe I removed the pain, but
honestly,
now you can say that after the story.
Honestly, it was easy in the sense that people reacted well and willing, and they were all willing to collaborate. But to work with the deadline of an exhibition and to organize different institutions, different materials,
no, that was
then it's
yeah.
Really complex. But so because again, so we collaborate with different institutions. We collaborate with the Tunen Institute in Germany, to name just a few because there are multiple. But there is let's say a storyline between the collaboration at the Tunen Institute, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and the Kew Gardens, and the Tunen Institute, as much as the Kew Gardens. And the images we have in front now, it's a library of samples of the Tunen Institute in Germany. It's an institute that is responsible to, between other things, to make analysis on samples of wood, also of objects or materials that enters European Union, in that case in Germany, at the Douane, to check if the declarations of the exporter is actually real. So if the materials they are exporting is what is declared. We thought this was an interesting thing to address, because the reality is that it's from very recent that the European Union started to create a legislation and asking that the wood object and specimen that enters European Union should be of legal nature. I mean, I don't know if we should address what legality means, because that's a completely different story also. So if you want, we can go down that path.
I think we should not.
Yeah, okay.
No,
Because we
I
talk
think we
about
should.
institutions. But
Okay.
so
Also because we are really a freak and it can be very boring discussion.
I think it's interesting. I think
We don't have the time. We don't have the time.
But then, okay, so we don't have the time. So with them, we did a test on forensic analysis on papers and objects that we collected in Europe and also collected by them, to see actually, to do our own investigation on the reality of objects. And we connected that also to a second part, which is a series of material samples. Also, some were extremely big that you showed us in pictures before, from the Kew Garden Xylarium, where we exactly this. They all come from the Great Exhibition of the 51. So they were exhibited in the Crystal Palace. I mean, we thought it was particularly interesting to show these samples because the Crystal Palace was, built very close by to the Serpentine, so also contextually it was making sense. But also because with the selling of the tickets of the Great Exhibition, the Kew Garden Xylarium was founded, and the Victorian Albert Museum was founded. And the Queen Victoria asked Henry Cole, which was the director of the artistic director of the Great Exhibition, to change the artistic schools of the kingdom into design education. I mean, what we call now design education. And I think there the program was clear. So you had a Great Exhibition, which was basically a collections of materials exploited from all over the world, specifically from countries that had, a colonial past. And so they could show their resources, they could show the achievement of industrial production. And here for us, the link of exploitation, industrial development, and the use of design for achieving that, it's done.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Victorian Albert was created and the Kew Garden Xylarium was created, it's also a way of giving to people a study collection in the form of a collection of beautiful furniture and other pieces of the Victorian Albert, and a material library, which is the one we have in front of us, of specimens extracted from the wealth of the kingdom.
That by 1851, some of them were already extinct. So the amazing stuff, there are all these small labels, and it was evident that it was written already that, certain species were gone already. So, yeah.
But they link to the Tunen Institute and what we said before, because...
And then we stopped.
Yes. Because, and you go ahead.
No, go. Now you finish.
because the countries that can control these tests and make sure that the specimens that entering European Union are, legal or non-legal. Of course, the countries that have a colonial past, because they have all these libraries of specimens collected from all over the world. And of course, we don't want to draw any conclusions, but there is a tension in here, which is important to be addressed.
It is super important. It is very beautifully and subtly addressed, which I think is very clever. We have to move forward because we're just in the beginning still. Yeah. And we have a lot of things and questions. So next part.
So the journey continues, and we leave the forest. As we walk out of the forest, we're entering into hollow lands, into territory. In the second part of the journey, we'd like to talk about territory, technologies, and the Anthropocene, and how these issues are discussed and addressed in your process and your production, in your work. We can really see this, your concern to these topics. One of the focuses of the Institute is to rethink the complexities of the territory, the landscape derived from technology and modernity, and how the landscapes and the territory are extremely shaped by technology, for example. We have been studying, and we have studied, for example, how nuclear energy is being crucial for us, not only to see nature in other ways, in other manners, but it's also created certain materials that are clear evidence of the Anthropocene, on how, for example, humans are one of the most important geological forces in the planet right now. the postnatural landscapes originated from the reefs and technological waste that you analyzed in your work, or streams, help us understand that the categories that organize modernity, such as geology, for example, or science, are no longer so valid and need to be blurred and somehow like diluted, because everything is a bit more viscous. So how did you read this, for example, this condition of postnatural as an opportunity for this project, or streams? How did our streams begin, if you could?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So sorry, Andrea, I had to wake up because, of course, we don't have anybody in the studio right now, and somebody rang at the door.
Perfect. Welcome
It could happen
to
to us
the
also. It could
conversation.
happen to us.
I don't know who this person is. So, no, it's a very good question. But to say how it started, actually, well, first of all, it started because of a commission from the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne, which is a museum there, that they were doing their first triennial of design and art, and they wanted to give us a commission. The commission was very specific because they were they started to also build a furniture collection. So our first request was saying, we are interested in your research, but the outcomes should be furniture pieces. And then we said, okay, we can do this. But then if we were in a moment of our path in the studio where we were ready to do a different, to go more in depth and to take a stance which was more programmatic and specific than our previous work. And so we started looking to the economy of Australia. And because the economy of Australia is so largely based on the extraction of minerals from the underground, we thought that was a very good starting point. And we, Andrea is back. And so we started actually looking into the extraction of minerals. But at one point in this process, we realized that there is something else extremely interesting happening above the surface of the planet. And that by the end of the century, the majority of things we will produce, we will largely use the metals recuperated from objects that are already existing above the surface of the planet. And we decided to focus on electronic waste because we were doing all our research on computers, because we were stuck in front of the computer, and because also it is becoming the fastest growing stream of waste globally. So it's not the biggest, but it's expanding, and everything is becoming electronic waste, because of course with the Internet of Things, all the objects that look still, they are becoming populated by electronic components. And so we thought this was extremely relevant to address, also because it allows us to address also subjects we're extremely interested. For instance, the fact that objects are designed in sophisticated, not sophisticated, sorry, it's really the wrong word, but the wealthy knows, I would say. And through the exploitations of resources that are not present there, and this dynamic repeat again when it's time to recycle these objects, because often nowadays things are improving. Sorry, this is our dog. They are still, even if after the Basel Convention of the '89 things improved, abroad to the south of the world to be recycled very often in ways that are irresponsible for the environment and for the laborer. So these are the reasons why and how the project came to exist.
Yeah. So you have really quickly gone through my, let's say, second question, at least slightly. I was actually interested how this investigation actually produces object itself, and of course it's it's really interesting the fact you said or you guys state on how these objects might work as a Trojan horse to initiate an exploration of the above ground mining. And it's really interesting how by looking at these wastes, all of the sudden we're kind of like inverting and not looking to extract from the ground, but all of a sudden we're starting to understand that there's so much stuff over the ground I mean, that's a really shifting, a change of view. It's really interesting. On the second hand, I was really curious on, after producing these objects, which seem they have a really nice, they're a really sleek line of design. Is desire ecological? Like, could we ever think that desire is ecological? And this object is a clear example on the contradictions that we might think, but that are actually working and are actually proposing something really interesting.
Well, I think the object, the exhibition was really a bit like Cambio, that had like different layers. Let's say that the most transformative part of the exhibition, they were not the objects. They were actually videos. For instance, there was a video where we stated very clearly which were possible solutions to approach design of electronic objects in a completely, or not completely ecological, but a much more sustainable and ecological way. We don't make example of this long investigation we did with the recyclers, but we have a video where clearly we state very small solution that can be applied to electronics to be better recycled. The object works in a completely different manners. As you said, they are Trojan horses. And we were, I mean, when you ask if they are ecological or not, well, of course they are done with recycled metal and using parts of old electronics, but I think that's not the point.
The objects are often interpreted as a solution.
Yeah.
Or a translation of the research, but they are not. They are a way of doing research on multiple levels. And here things get a bit complicated, but we can address this. When we say that they are Trojan horses, we literally mean it, in the sense that, yes, they are, produced with recycled metals and so on. But in a way, when the museum commissioned us to produce these objects, then the fact itself that we had to look into companies that produces recycled metal, that we had to look into companies that produce gold extracted from circuit boards, it is an excuse or a Trojan horse to enter in contact and to address this research. Then the object works also on a way that it is well, we feel it, the objects are research in the sense that when you have been spending months, actually a year, looking to a subject, and then you start to think about how can this manifest into furniture, because this is what we have been asked. Then you start to wonder, like, what kind of furniture should this be? And then we decided to focus on the office, of course, for obvious reason. You can say like technology is there, and so on. But it's for plenty of other reasons. And we started to focus also on the idea of cubicles.
Yes.
Because we were starting to reflect on what, on a macro scale, how is it possible that the chains of custody of things become so blurry? How is it possible that we designers are fragmented in our own practice and we are not informed, we are not part of a certain conversation? And then suddenly the idea of fragmentation of responsibilities came to exist in our mind. But it came to exist because we started thinking about the office as more pertinent environment to design furniture than the homeware. And then we started thinking about how offices are designed. And we realized how the fragmentation of responsibilities is what lead to the economic system we work within, and what is the biggest problem, for instance, in terms of ecological development within even huge corporations. Because if everything is fragmented, how can you come up with an holistic solution? So you see, the object works in several different ways, but for us, there are also all these layers that are not visible, and it's not important, because when I look at them, I'm still very happy with them, and they're great. But also as objects themselves. But yes, so this is how they work, basically.
Yeah, they definitely rise, or at least like when we were looking at them, they rise a lot of these questions and topics. And as soon as you read a little bit on the research behind, you could like start relating, like we really like this project. There's certain topics that we enjoyed a lot on investigating deeply. Another thing I would like to, and I would like to finish with this project after this final question. At some point during your process, this question goes into more of your process as a studio. You have changed the tools of the design processes, including social media and digital platforms as spaces of investigation where society participates, and all of a sudden, like your research is taking some sort of participative process. It's interesting how, for example, like this participation into this process of design of research that you are doing, it actually comes from the very object from like which you are developing and working. Phones and computers are actually the very platform that is being used to develop this collaborative investigation. So all of the sudden we found in like when looking at this project, like the cycle closed again, and it was a really holistic and a really transversal view. So could you say phones, like how are our phones transforming investigative design into this participatory process?
Wow. It's a kind of well, they are transforming simply because we are using every day them, and we easily access to information we were not able to do it before. I mean, it's very like banal what I'm saying, but
no, but they just became tools, and I think probably we started seeing them, well, the problem and the solution in a way, you could argue. So we use them as a way of visualizing even ideas. So they became part of the language. The language of phones became the language of the work. The language of the digital language became part of, and so we started using renderings. We started using.
But even like I remember, like once we did a conference at the Serpentine, and
this was the best way we used the phone.
Exactly, that was a fantastic. It was really about our streams. So what we did, we posted 30 photos on our Instagram page, and people had to kind of follow us in the profile.
So people during the lecture were not looking at us; they were looking at their phones.
The phone, and they were like switching.
Hans Ulrich loved it.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, on a meta level, of course, we were speaking about that, so it was making absolutely sense.
But then, well, you are the one really like working a lot with Instagram, and for us, I guess we can say that it was interesting, for instance, to start using Instagram more as our own archive, also almost as a curated environment, because it has an architecture which is similar as an exhibition space in a way. You could create the public program with it, Instagram TV. You can create the gallery with the things, and you know, it's why using it as just a form of promotional tool? It is still a form of a promotion in the case of what you do, but instead of being
so direct. I mean, but
also so about showing yourself. You can also give something in the meantime. Do you know what I mean? That's what we were trying to do, I think, with Instagram.
Definitely. Yeah, and we love it.
And we love it. We get to see a lot of what's happening.
We learn a lot. We're
learning a lot from your Instagram.
So let's move.
Yeah.
So now we go to under a Volcano, and I pushed to take over this part because I never missed the opportunity to say that I'm from Sicily. We use the Volcano Tambora as example. So like from the institute, we always trying to investigate the relations and displacement between nature and culture. There are two categories that are often displaced, but we believe they can no longer be independent. So we believe that your work is pushing a critical look to the natural from a different perspective. So it's proposing a context in a different way. And we think that your work is describing a critical look and a cultural construction of it. So this example of the Volcano It's an eruption of the Mount Tambora in 1815 in Indonesia. That generated new imaginary, so it generate text and novels of a different landscape. And it's bringing us to your project, the Natura Fossilium, which is your investigation on the Volcano Etna, and its actions and its context, and how this mountain and volcano is linked to their context of Catania and Sicily. So if we say that design does not produce an object, not only produce an object, but can also generate a different view of their context. We read from your words that it's the Natura Fossilium is an expedition in which the landscape is not passively contemplated, but restlessly sampled, melted, blown, woven, cast, and milled. So we wanted to ask you how, for this project, your process and design is building new meaning and new stories to the context of the volcano. So how you're presenting and proposing this context through the final objects.
Yes. So, well, something that it's important to mention. So I'm, as you, I'm Sicilian too. I live very close to the volcano, and we all the time go in Sicily for holiday, and he's very happy about that. Sometimes not, but most of the time, yes. And once we went during Christmas time, and there was a huge eruption, and all the street around the Etna volcano got completely covered by ashes. And for me was like, okay, yes, let's sweep it out, and let's continue our life. But for him, of course, it was like, what is this? And I think that was probably the beginning of our fascination towards this entity that it's really excavated itself and offered material that most of the time they ended up in trash, in the trash can.
Well, not in trash can, but maybe pushed aside.
Yeah.
But the other images that you included are also quite interesting, the one of the tourists, because in fact, I think the other moment that for us became important is when of course I wanted to see the volcano. So we went up to it, and we were just like these people walking on it. And it's impossible not to feel that as a surreal experience, because you are in this space that even if you don't want, feels metaphysical, and it feels completely great also. But then you have this touristic experience where you look at the surface of it, and the reality is that when you see the volcano exploding, or you're familiar with it, it feels much closer to a place of production, where it's the mountain that is mining itself and exposes material. So that's where it started. We really wanted to see what it means to relate to a space, to a place. And we were also extremely fascinated because we found these pictures from the 70s where you had like Sicilians, citizens being on a volcano, and the volcano back then was effusive, exactly that picture. And they were collecting lava from there on the spot and molding it into a matrix. And this idea of this relationship with it's the ground zero of production. It's really taking nature and squeeze it into a mold. We're so much fascinated by this image. And then, the work started from a fascination. And then later in the years, it mutated from, after exploring, the possibilities of creating glass actually out of these ashes. And we started being fascinated by this idea of sort of a hyper localized form of production,
and also non-extractive production.
Indeed, this is where this is going, because then if you use the ashes, it's you don't extract it. It's just at least it is extractive, because even sand sit there on the surface. But the idea, for instance, as we did later, to apply it for glazes for ceramic, it is the idea that you don't extract the glaze from the underground, but you actually use it for yes, and pictures. It's interesting. You managed to dig up pictures that, I mean, we don't have these pictures.
We created.
We were sneaky.
We went there.
We were there taking pictures.
We were trying to make bricks. Sorry, but I really have to say, we were trying to make bricks in lavic glass, and then it didn't really work out. Okay. Yeah, we try.
This one.
Yes.
Exactly.
Actually,
There you
your answer is linking to the next question, because when I was digging more into the project, I was really interested by your way of connecting the production locally. And I know a bit what does it mean to produce in Sicily with all its connotation. And it's we wanted to ask you like how working with this material turns like it generates an alchemy, with the context and material and the workers. But it has to be we feel like it has to be in this specific location, because as you said, it's like the ground zero of the material is like the point zero where everything starts. And we wanted to ask you how important it is to work and collaborate with these local artisans, especially in such like a globalized context and world where it's often the production of a product it's displayed somewhere else. But of course, like in this contextual practice of this project especially, it's extremely linked to the context. So we wanted to ask you a bit more about the process. That is not just cutting off a rock, because you also have been experimenting, like molding with the ashes and the powder and generating other outcome of the material.
Well, I mean, it was clear since the beginning we wanted to do something there in Sicily, which it's not necessarily the case with all the things we have been doing, because at one point the work was so expansive and needed specific knowledge, so we couldn't really work only there. But we definitely also wanted to work with some craftsmen there, actually with some producers there, exactly. And we did it. And well, of course, it is extremely important, because well, there is a sense of belonging, understanding of context and place in the relationship with materials. And I mean, we never departed from a romantic perspective. So it's not about that we believe in this hyper local as necessarily the best solution ever. We are always scared of the narrative because it is often appropriated by nationalist politicians. But on the other side, we don't see why, if you are more a leftist, you should leave the narrative in the hands of idiots. So in a way, this work is a way to say there is an importance still in finding a relationship between the place and what you can produce in the place. And it is important because people identify with it. And it's not only stupid and superficial and nationalistic in a shallow sense. So in a way, what is beautiful about this work is that part from there, but it also, to exist, needed the knowledge of people and contributors that comes from all over Europe, basically, from Turkey,
from Vienna, Turkey, Murano. I mean, at the end, we got again very global.
It would be beautiful if it could, have led to the establishment of a glass factory in Sicily, but it didn't. But okay, yeah.
Okay, so we're getting slowly towards the end of it, the journey, but this leads us to a new part of the conversation, more directly related to your studio as a kind of laboratory for new materials and processes, for new ways and forms for making and doing these alchemies of design that Matteo was addressing, the new objects and their materialities, the stories behind your experiments. And I think it is with no doubt that we need new materials and new ecologies for the present, like the situations and things like these plastic agglomerates. This is one of the materials that we're investigating from the Institute, all of these amalgams of rocks and microplastics, and how this is opening completely and how this demands us a completely different approach towards our material catalog. We have looked on your project Botanica, in which, for example, you investigate the production of polymers from botanical and animal sources, which we loved. And we love getting to know more about design practices and finding this kind of laboratory images. Can you tell us more about these specific alchemies that you're doing in the studio, or these kind of processes?
Well, as always, like we start from investigation within the studio, we melting within our kitchen, but then there is a moment in which you, exactly,
There you go.
there you are. But then there is, thank
just
you.
say it.
But of course, there is a moment in which that is not enough. So in general, when we work with whatever project, we start with our kiln, or we were starting, because I would say like also our practice shifted a lot from Botanica to Orestream and Cambio. Let's say that it's becoming more and more abstract.
We are less hands-on.
Hands-on, yeah. But that's also fine. It's I think we first of all we really wanted to understand what working with matter means, and now we are trying to understand other meaning of
more context
material, and exactly context, yeah, etc. So well, at the beginning we were really working like this, but then we understood that to kind of get to a second step that could have been go towards more production, we should have visit centers where actually material were produced. And this is a project that we developed after Botanica with the drug design. It was called
Reality Tank,
where actually drug wanted to connect this more experimental work with laboratory, and to try to push this material that they were very experimental into maybe material for production. And well, at the end, we didn't succeed. It was very costly. So drug design also at a certain moment decided to leave the work aside. But for us, it was very interesting because we could test some of the more experimental and very intuitive material we were developing within the studio, and try to push it to more an industrial production. And to name a few, in our investigation for Botanica, we were using shellac. That it's a material that it's actually excrement of a small bug that is colonizing trees in South Asia. We were working with bois d'Orsay, that it's a 19th century material that is a mix between sawdust and blood, that with the high temperature is becoming a practically polymer, and so on. So much more other material. But we were doing, again, as I said, like in our kitchen, in our studio kitchen. But then we wanted to test it much better with Wageningen University in Holland.
Yeah, definitely. And there is something you, when we were digging into these beautiful objects and materials, there is something about these objects that you say that are designed as if the old-based era in the living never took place. I love this kind of speculative, almost fictional approach to design, like leaving this fictional approach. I think it's very important. And do you feel that the speculation can help to open new horizons for design processes? This kind of non-fictional thinking.
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I think definitely no. Speculation is definitely important. It depends how it is used. It depends how it is used. We've seen. I mean, honestly, it's a silly question. Of course, as everything, it depends how you use it. So there has been very interesting speculative projects and others that are not so effective. And I think in this moment, I think speculation, of course, we are all sort of, how can I say, in depth with, Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby and the work they did, with their design interaction course. And I think nowadays it is still totally vital to use speculation. But to respond to this question, maybe I should say that, for instance, one way that we thought was extremely effective to use speculation, that it's more common now within design, is to offer it to other. For instance, in Cambio, we involved a professor from the Free University of Amsterdam that works with legislation and governance. And we sort of convinced him to come up with speculative papers on possible governance of forests at different scales, like local, transnational, and even proposing possibilities of rights for trees. And for him, that was a different ways of working, but he totally understand the sort of the strength and the the possibility of speculation to make, because when you do so, you make it, they seem immediately feasible, and then a conversation can start. But it's something that we've seen also with utopian architecture. You know that if you don't tag it as utopian, you can use it as a way of testing realities, really, and I think that is interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so just to try to wrap up and start finishing. So from the Institute, we are always trying to rethink our own idea of a studio, of a collective, of a structure, trying to rethink our own structure. At the moment, we are 10, 11 people, and we think we have to somehow change our platform from the only problem solving to more the question making, understanding design, but also research, the relation towards the academic production or thought production, curatorial practices, so as dynamic and interconnected processes. And we believe in this very specific moment, it is crucial to understand the relation with universities, young people, young designers that you're super into and leading two different groups or more.
Yeah. So in that sense, and well, from the institute, we are developing, and we are really focused on the academic approach and the academic sides of the platform. We believe academy and the creation, just creating the platform for thinking to be made is really important in order to be tag along and to be interconnected with production, with well, any other way of rethinking our situation and where we are placed. So we wanted to ask you, how important is it for you, your practice, to be running geodesign, for example, because you are the head of geodesign at Eindhoven, and the MADE program in Sicily, and how do both lines interconnect with each other? Because it's a really interesting conglomerate or entanglement.
I would say that I'm not sure if they're really complementing. I think they depart from the same thinking.
Yeah,
so
indeed.
But I think the contexts are very different. So the Sicilian context and the Eindhoven one are very different. So well, if I can speak about the Sicilian one, for us, of course, the challenge was to actually build and create a school in a context in which actually design is not even considered. So even if we started with really big words and really thinking about that education that should have been disruptive for the entire Italian country, at the end, for us, it was very important at the end that it was disruptive for Sicily. And I mean, we managed it. Yeah. Through the education, the 3 years bachelor, the program that we do in Sicily during summer, bringing people there and speaking about all the things we are speaking tonight. I think it was for us it is very, very important, because it's a context where in the near future and this is already being challenged by climate crisis, huge migration flows. There's no production happening there, so there is like all the huge issues that they are actually and will invest all the hemisphere. With geodesign instead, I think is much more structured. We are really trying to tackle the ecological issue in a much more profound way, I would say.
Well, also it was very generous from Jose Grima, the director of Design Academy, to offer us to lead this department, which was conceived, not conceived, but sort of as a word was introduced by him, because the geodesign is also an exhibition platform that is taken care of by Martina Muzzi, and then we are taking care of the heading of the department. And it's for us an opportunity to extend our work within education, because not because we want to teach to others necessarily, but because we have the feeling that because it's important not to do things alone, because the relevance of what you can do with your own practice is extremely limited. So if that expands further in different ways, well, then it becomes a culture, and then it becomes a movement, and then real change really happens. So that's the attempt. It's still ambitious, but it's better than, you know, sometimes we complain within our own studio because we can't do with the clients what we want. You know, we're still making stupid things sometimes. Not stupid, we don't try to make stupid things, but not as radical as we would wish them to be.
But that's also the reality of.
So education helps that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So, well, should I continue with this?
Yeah.
Or,
So
yeah,
we just
yes,
last couple of questions.
Yeah, so I really like this this answer of expanding on how this academic look at your practice is expanding your practice to be more relevant. And now we're like focusing on your studio. We are really interested in how you have been able, like, or how your studio has transformed. For example, your practice has, or at least we suppose your structure has mutated drastically from being a more like a design studio into a really deep and investigative research, almost agency that dives into projects in a really, really interesting way. How do you feel that transformation in your studio? How did you feel it?
But I think it's interesting that you see that, because for us, you know, it's been always like that, and it's very organic also. It's not really, I mean, for instance, next week we are going to take the entire week to try to structure the studio for the following 10 years. So we are really trying to make
in a week, in a week
time we are trying to shape
good luck with that.
Exactly. But
at least we took a week
exactly.
Because we never do that.
Exactly. So at least we are trying to do that. Because we also feel this urge to differentiate the more commercial side from the more research side, because also, just to be really sincere, you need to find different teams that can work very well in designing a chair, and others that can be very good.
And we are still a very small studio, very small.
So in this moment we are in 6 people. So I mean, it's super tiny studio, and we are doing exhibition design, a research project, product design, you know, and we also have limited budget because, you know, most of the time we also finance the more research project through the not research one. So we really need to find a balance. We are not, you know, we don't take funds from anybody, you know. At the end, we are a private enterprise. So we need to kind of make sure that at the end of the year we can survive. What was the question? How did we change?
I think
yeah. Go ahead.
No, there is only one thing that it changed. I think it started more, and I talk about not really the studio, but the two of us. We started with a more intuitive approach, and at one point we understood the consequences of our own work. Like we were talking about certain issues since the early beginning. Our graduation work was about refugee crisis, the relationship with local culture, and the second one was about, in a way, rural poverty and the use of humble materials, and then colonialism, and then all the rest. But at the beginning, we're really looking into the world of objects. And then through the consequences of making those works, we understood that we weren't really interested only in that. But we were interested in the bigger forces shaping those realities we're looking into. And then so with ore streams and Cambio, I think we came to a different level of, I would say, commitment and even, like, I would say, critical mass.
Yeah, but
and then that's where we want to go.
But that will help us also in structuring the studio in a much more profitable way, because I mean, we must have like a commercial side. There's no way that we can't have it. But then I think that should be separated. It should be informed and influenced by the research side. But then we need to find a way to make the commercial side grow, so we can, you know, use really that part to be even more ambition for the more.
And dividing the two, we can radicalize the other two.
Exactly.
So
Absolutely.
It seems like a paradox. It seems like a paradox, but yeah,
but it works.
It's I think it's we were actually during these days preparing this talk, we were like fascinating to see how you're combining this research aspect as a studio and a platform, and also running the other side, which is more technical and more related to the product itself and to the sellability of it. Just to wrap up and close, first I wanted to ask if you have any question for us, because we want to always to like leave it open and not just
we're always making questions
at you, and just to know what you're working on, if you are gonna take a break or you are still working on something new. And yeah, basically the last question is what we're gonna talk with you next year, if you have any next topic or some lines that you're gonna follow with the studio.
We will still talk about timber, I think.
Yeah,
hopefully.
I mean, the Cambio will travel in different museums, so we are expanding the research, but also we finally found a company that is willing to have us involved, almost like an external R&D.
So not only on a product level, but thinking about more holistically what they do. But it's way too early to see if that will go well or if it will reach a certain degree of outcome or.
But it's happening, so we are very happy.
Let's hope that everything will be great.
While we are doing a lot of exhibition design, so we have 5 exhibition design in a row for the next year. We are designing product, and
then we will start a new research project. I mean, Cambio will continue, and I think something we are interested in exploring, that we are also exploring with your design, and students will explore in the third trimester, is design for actually non-human beings. So that is something we are more and more interested
in. So we can have a lot of other discussion together.
Perfect.
Absolutely. We
will.
There is already enough design for humans.
Yeah.
Indeed. So yeah.
Nice.
Well, so it was really a pleasure. Thank you very much for being there, for your work, for your practice. Please, let's keep in touch, and we just send you hugs from Madrid.
Thank you so much. And
thank you for having us. It was nice speaking with you guys. And no questions for you.
For now.
Awesome. I mean, you can still make them. But yeah, hopefully we can keep the conversation soon.
And that design for the non-human seems a nice topic to sit around with a cup of coffee.
2021.
For 2021.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Take care.
You're welcome. Bye, guys.
Thank you to everyone on the other side on YouTube looking at us.
Yeah.
Thank you for being there. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Y se fue.